Welcome. Welcome to the second Board of Education meeting for the Penfield Board of Education. The meeting will be called to order at 7:15. Please rise, and the clerk will lead us in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, it is appropriate that we have a motion and a second that the agenda for November 17th, 2020 be approved as submitted.
So moved. Second.
Any questions or discussions? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion carries. The approval of the consent agenda. May I have a motion and a second for the approval of consent agenda, including the approval of the minutes of November 3rd as submitted, the acceptance of the recommendation from the Committee of Special Education, the acceptance of recommendations from the Committee on Preschool Special Education, the acceptance of the recommendations from the Superintendent for personnel changes, and the approval of request to dispose of unserviceable textbooks. We have a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion carries. There's no treasurer's reports today. Which brings us to the special reports. Dr. Putnam?
Yeah, we have one special report with two wonderful presenters. This report is our secondary school action plans. If you remember at our last meeting, we had our 4 elementary principals doing the elementary action plans. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Winton Buddington, the Bay Trail principal, and Dr. Leslie Maloney, our high school principal. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam. We appreciate the opportunity to share our school action plans with the board and the community. What we plan to do tonight is go through kind of the highlights of our plan. Board members,
I'm just going to stop you. Apologize if you can put the mic in front of you. Thank you.
we appreciate the opportunity to share our action plans with the board and the community. This evening, we're going to go through a highlight of the plans. I believe the board members have a detailed copy of the plans. And for our community watching, we will be posting our plans on our website so community members can also see that detail.
And I think it's important to mention, whether we do it here or at the end, that we so appreciate you as a Board of Education for maintaining consistent goals for the district. And I know we say this every year, but this year, especially with all of the changes, to know that we were still focusing on the same goals, I think it really, truly helped. And I don't mean to speak for all 6 of us, but it really did help all 6 of us as we lead our buildings through all of the craziness. It was nice to have something steady.
So as we look at a general overview, really we're continuing the work of our elementary colleagues to provide a consistent journey for our students. Our last board meeting, our elementary colleagues talked about the consistency across the 4 elementary schools. As students progress from the elementary schools and come to Bay Trail, we greatly appreciate their work in having students come with consistent programming from the elementary schools. And that helps us as students. We bring students together at Bay Trail, and they transition then through Bay Trail as they begin their secondary journey to the high school. Middle school students are unique. The needs of 11 to 14-year-old students, they're going through adolescence, they're exploring their interests, who they are, who they want to be, what they like. It's a lot about peers, it's a lot about relationships. That's one of our biggest challenges this year, keeping social distancing, not having everybody in the building, and the wearing of masks, is that connection for student to student and student to staff. But it's all part of the journey coming through Bay Trail and then transitioning on to the high school.
And as Mr. Buddington mentioned, our focus for goal number 1 is essentially how do we support our students during this global pandemic, both academically and social emotionally. And we also recognize that our country is experiencing 2 pandemics, the COVID pandemic as well as the pandemic of racism. So in order to support our students, we have to first provide our faculty and staff with the tools in their toolboxes. And this means professional development around the multicultural teaching, equity, and culturally responsive practices. And the social emotional needs, you know, in the surveys that, and we have found the data from the surveys that the district has facilitated to be so powerful, because particularly this last survey where the data was, it was solely qualitative, and to have parents and students echoing social emotional or SEL, social emotional learning or SEL, truly means that our community is valuing this work and hearing this work, and that social emotional support needs to continue. So how do we utilize new technologies and structures to continue providing the mental health support or connecting families with the mental health support? Because things look so differently both inside and outside within the community.
And a lot of our efforts at the beginning of this school year were really around that safe and supportive environment aspect of the social emotional learning, providing students with that safe environment to come into the building, helping them adjust and learn new routines, new procedures, getting used to wearing masks, and the students have done a fantastic job. They have understood the concern, understood the need for the safety, and have followed through with everything we've asked them to do within the school, wearing their masks, social distancing when they can, in the classrooms. Even in the hallways, you'll see students attempt to social distance as best they can. It's not always possible all the time passing in the hallways, but the students really have done a great job with taking on and understanding the need for all of these new safety precautions. They're challenged by the learning environment, and that brings us back to the social emotional needs of students, both the students that are in school in the hybrid model, because they're in school partially 2 days a week, but they're home more than they're in school. They're home 3 days a week. And that remote learning challenges students, because the teachers can explain so much on a video. It's not the same as having the students in the classroom. And staff will continue to work on adjusting their instruction to challenge students, but also to connect students to help them learn in that remote model. From a social emotional standpoint, connecting with students not only in the building, but also when they're home virtually. We face challenges with technology virtually. We face challenges with students' comfort level being on camera, where we continue to work with students on those and check in with students when we can. Staff at the middle school, we have staff that are doing virtual check-ins with students on their remote days now to help them on their remote learning. We have counselors doing one-on-one sessions with students virtually. And I know there's a lot of programs going on at the high school to support students as well.
So the sub-goal of supporting academic achievement at both buildings is really about how we support the faculty and staff in delivering the same quality of instruction that Penfield families and students are used to receiving in this hybrid 100% virtual, in these hybrid and 100% virtual models. And we have to give a huge thank you to the directors. Nicole, Kristen, Scott, Jason, and Sheena have truly supported both buildings in making everything on this slide happen. Microsoft Teams is new for all of us, whether you're the principal or you're the student or you're the parent, the teacher. A lot of the work this school year is focused on providing support for teachers, students, and families. For example, I'm selfishly going to put a plug in that 9th and 10th grade parents should have gotten an email today letting them know that tomorrow's grade level seminar for students is tips and tricks in Microsoft Teams. That's at 2 o'clock tomorrow through Teams, their grade level Teams. But also in terms of the RTI interventions that we provide, the close monitoring, it's still continuing, but it's in this new, in the new structure that we're operating in. How do we utilize the technologies to continue to provide those interventions? So we really ensure that no students slip through the cracks. And how do we diagnose the issues and then provide the supports? Whether the supports mean having students, we just worked with the transportation department, a huge shout out to the transportation department to figure out how to provide academic support after school for students. We've got some creative methods going on the virtual Wednesdays, working with students, and then right up to home visits, working with the tech services to diagnose tech issues. How do we work together as a team to really support our students and our families? And I think a lot of the feedback that families and students were able to provide on the surveys has really helped us to know where that support is needed, but also some ideas in terms of how we might be able to craft unique opportunities and take advantage of those.
The second goal is focused on our partnerships, and one of the major focuses for us is the work we've continued to do on the transition of students as they transition from Bay Trail 8th graders to become 9th graders at Penfield High School. Over the past few years at Bay Trail, we've worked on our transition from elementary school to Bay Trail, especially with a focus on our special ed program and our students in special education, aligning more closely the supports that we have at Bay Trail for those students in the programs in the continuum, looking at our consultant teacher model and adding in more appropriate consultant teacher supports for students, which is what they had coming from the elementary school. Those students now are transitioning through Bay Trail and are 8th graders, and that's part of this next transition that we're working on this year with the high school as those students transition to the high school for continuity of that program to the high school. The partnerships, our PTA, PTSA partnership is crucial for us. We are working in our buildings and with our PTAs and our shared decision-making teams to develop equity and cultural response teams within each building, to be having the conversations with our parents and with our students around what does a cultural responsive school look like? What are our indicators that we're working toward with that? And our parents are key in that. We need to have the voices of our parents and our students be part of that conversation. Our partnerships with local institutions, Delphi Rise is the organization that has drug and alcohol counselors both at the high school, Bay Trail, and the elementary schools. And the Villa of Hope provides a counselor for students to see during the school day at both Bay Trail and the high school. Our fourth area of partnerships is our staff has done an amazing job still taking on student teachers, practicum students, observation students in partnership with our local colleges. The colleges have also a program, there's a teaching fellows program that provides us a little more support with substitutes, where we have a student that's in our buildings as a daily substitute that's connected to the college and the college programs. And I want to thank Barb Gregory for supporting that program and helping us get that program up and running last year, and it's been a big help this year.
And I would echo everything that Mr. Buddington said. I think particularly our PTSAs are truly standing beside us in terms of helping. I know the PHS PTSA is focused on how can we work together, and the partnership, I would say, has never been so strong. How can we include and involve more students in PTSA? How can we involve more parents, and how can we be collaborative with the other PTSAs? I think the most recent Nicole Doyley presentation speaks volumes in terms of the partnerships of the PTSAs and truly supporting the work around equity. Something that is not mentioned here, but you'll see in our plans, is truly, and I know the elementaries talked about this, the events and the traditions that we, there is no homecoming this year, so what do we do instead? How do we find new ways to celebrate and still continue the positive school cultures that we have? And we're doing a lot of work right now on some of the senior traditions. And last spring, when there were so many outside of the box things that we did for seniors as well as 8th graders to acknowledge those traditions and those rites of passage. And it's fun to see what is sticking in terms of what may be coming, new traditions. And that's kind of cool. The partnerships, I wanted to comment about Delphi Rise and Villa of Hope in terms of the partnerships, and I know we talked about the SEL piece, but truly in each of the goals, the SEL comes through. Delphi Rise has been amazing. Last week or 2 weeks ago, Delphi Rise partnered with us to bring a presenter for our seminars on drunk driving. And anything, it's so nice in these times that are challenging to have these outside partners and these established relationships that we can lean on and say, hey, can you help us with this? Can you help us? The Monroe County Sheriff's Department has been absolutely fabulous and continues to be. We're working with the Out Alliance again on our grade level seminars, NAMI, some of these organizations with these long-standing partnerships. They're able to think outside of the box and deliver their content to students, and we're extremely fortunate and grateful for those partnerships.
You can continue.
So for goal number 3, when I look at these 3 bullets, the first bullet, I think we would be remiss if we did not say thank you to Alan McNiff and his team, whether it's been masks, PPE, hand sanitizer, the most recent COVID testing, setting up our gyms. Alan makes the impossible possible, and he built an isolation room here in no time at all, based on the guidelines that were given to us from SED, and and that's another. I think we probably should give a shout out to all of district office, because when we need to it's so nice to have support that we can lean on in these challenging times, because none of us have ever experienced this, nor did any of us go to school and take a course on how to lead in a pandemic. So it's so wonderful to have so much support. Our budgets, it's in terms of how we are approaching budgeting, and staffing, it's a whole different ballgame than how we've ever looked at it before. I mean, think about a year ago, we had never thought of virtual instruction and how we would staff that, or how that would impact our budgets. But again, the support that we've been able to receive, and in order to make things happen, it really it means a lot. And I think, speaking on both of our behalves, I think our buildings appreciate, and I think we're really I would say, proud of where we are right now. Because in August, it felt like, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to make this happen? And each day, as Winton said, kids come to school. While we can't see their smiles, it's great to see their smiling eyes. And it's great to be back in our buildings and doing what we do best, which is instructing kiddos.
And I think we recognize, and I think our staffs recognize as well, that this is not the situation any of us want to be in. It's not a perfect process. It's by far not the ideal learning environment that we want to be in. But it is through the collective efforts that we continue to work with parents, with staff, with students, with district office, with the Board of Education, with state ed. As we keep getting changing guidance, we get new regulations, new requirements. It is the only way to continue to get through this is together, and it is a collective process to do that. And we appreciate the team that we have here in Penfield to work with through that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Board. Do you have any questions? Lisa?
Hi, guys. Thanks for being here. I just had a comment first, and I have a question. I really appreciate your presentation, and I appreciate you're so positive, and there's a lot to not be positive for lately, it seems like, and I really appreciate that aspect of your presentation and really talking about those things that we're grateful for, those partnerships and Team Penfield, so I really appreciate that. My question is, I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit about the survey results that came out. I know there was a lot of parents invested, and are there specific things that you're seeing rising to the top for your buildings, and how might you be addressing those? Thank you.
So at the high school, I have to say, I was so impressed with Kevin Marriott's analysis of the data and his presentation. I had him come and present his findings to the PHS leadership team, our department chairs, as well as our union representation. And then I followed up and I shared the results with each of the departments. And I think there is so much to be celebrated in the data. If you think about where we've come in, as of June 30th, we were not a one-to-one school, one-to-one district, and look at how far we have come. And parents appreciate, they see the hard work. And then how do we take, we need to celebrate the positives, and then how do we take the feedback and begin to make those tweaks to fine-tune what we're delivering. And at PHS, we really, not only did we take the survey data, the most recent survey data, but from the spring, some of the feedback that we heard, and you see it in our instructional model, was really around providing, having everyone on one tool. So that's where Teams has really been a huge help, and the professional development, getting everybody up on board with that. And I think that's made a huge difference. Another piece of feedback that we heard was around academic help. How do students get, when they're struggling, how do they get help? And we worked really hard. Our Academic Success Center is very successful, not to use the word twice, for in-person students. How do we transition that to virtual? And so we've been working on how we provide that. I think the special education program that Scott Dreschler led with Jen Lerner and Emily Buss, a lot of that was based on feedback from parents of students with disabilities. The most recent survey data, some of the changes that you'll see, we dug really deep into trying to provide consistency amongst teachers, and that's challenging because this is new, and everybody's still getting their feet under them, but we need to work on consistencies around homework, So on in-person days, students starting the second quarter should not be receiving additional homework on in-person days. We looked at some of the specific grading and pulled that apart a little bit. We really went through the data, the individual departments, and there were some pieces for different departments that we could make some tweaks. And I think I cannot say enough in terms of how valuable that data is, particularly because it's qualitative. We can dig deep, and families that were able to provide that feedback. The other piece, as I mentioned, around the social emotional learning, and Kevin actually pointed this out in his analysis, to have families echoing social emotional learning, or SEL, to have students echoing that, truly speaks to the work of not only the buildings, but also the district and the board. I don't know, what about Bay Trail?
So I think, first of all, I do want to appreciate the parents and students that reached out early on in the year about their concerns and about some of their struggles and challenges, and we saw that those concerns also reflected in the survey data from a larger group of students. From the student perspective, a lot of the results for Bay Trail were about that lack of peer connection and being able to work together. So part of that, our Bay Trail PBIS team, Positive Behavior Intervention Support Team, is working on what are some other activities we can use to engage students, what are some things that we can do virtually, because we also want to engage not only the students that are in school in the hybrid model, but make those connections with virtual students. So our clubs and activities did start up virtually. Our drama club is meeting, our clubs are meeting now, and those are virtual clubs, so students can have that, part of that connection is happening there. On the academic side, it's as teachers transition to technology, it's the challenge of not just taking the lesson that you used to teach in person and presenting that on virtual and recording that presentation. That's kind of where the shift started. Now we're having conversations, and teachers are having a conversation with each other about what strategies are working, what technologies are they using, how are they using Nearpod, how are they using different features of Nearpod to engage students when they're doing virtual instruction for our students that are 100% virtual, but also when the students are remote, and what can they do to engage students on the remote days and have some of that feedback coming back as well on those days. So those are some of the conversations that are going on now as a result of that survey data. It is a continual process. It is a continual transition. As Dr. Maloney said, starting the year one-to-one with technology, we didn't have the opportunity to train students on the technology. We didn't have the opportunity to fully train our teachers on the technology, but we did hear loud and clear from parents and students last spring the consistency was important, the consistency in teams. And so part of the early feedback we got at Bay Trail as well was how teachers are assigning assignments. Where are they putting the assignments? And so we've developed some protocols for staff on how the assignments should be labeled, different options for naming them, so it's clearer if students are a hybrid student, if they're a remote day, what they should be doing on each day. So hopefully parents are seeing some of that. This is all still in progress, so I'm not sitting here saying we fixed that. It's still something that we continue to have to do, because these are all new routines and habits that we're all having to learn and make shifts to. So the feedback is important, and we do appreciate that feedback from the surveys.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? I just want to say thank you. You know, the disruptions of this year have affected, all communities, and our students are really a community within a community. And you are the ones who are shepherding this student community to make sure that they stay healthy, and both mentally and physically, to make sure that they continue to learn and continue to grow as they prepare to leave to the adult community. And I think, everybody appreciates what you've done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Both Wynton and Leslie, thank you very much for being here this evening. That concludes all of our school action plans, K-12, and also concludes special reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. One moment. Which brings us to visitor speaking time. This is the designated time for the district residents to bring their comments to the board. The board encourages residents to share their opinions, voice concerns, and offer suggestions in a constructive atmosphere. Matters involving particular individuals or specifics of negotiations are not permitted during the public session and should be addressed privately with the board president or superintendent. Comments brought to the board will be taken under consideration. However, this is not a time when the board can answer questions or engage in dialogue. A request to speak form must be filled out prior to the start of the meeting and given to the district clerk. Speakers are expected to identify themselves with their name and address before presenting and limit their comments to 5 minutes or less. The board president reserves the right to limit the total time of visitor speaking time based upon the length of the agenda. Written communications to the board are also encouraged. Do we have anyone here to speak today? No, thank you. Which brings us to our student representative report. Abby, would you please give us your report?
Hello, everybody. It is that time again. To start things off, at Penfield High School, the robotics team had National STEM and STREAM Day, where they had a series of activities for elementary students to learn about STEM-related topics. Many students are competing in the final games and meets of their fall sports, for example, cross-country, swimming, and soccer. And the robotics team also held a donation drive at a local food pantry for frozen turkeys. At Cobbles, students took time to write letters of appreciation to local veterans. At Scribner, the 5th grade teaching team created a bulletin board that included handwritten notes from students to honor the 100% virtual teachers. At Indian Landing, a 1st grader won a t-shirt for demonstrating good choices and showing partner's pride. And at Harris Hill, Mrs. Miller's 3rd grade class wrote thank you letters to veterans at the Fairport Baptist Home, and you could tell it made their day from the pictures. And a group of students did their writing outside during the nice burst of weather that I still wish we had today. And Mrs. Ramsey's class took time to define and discuss the terms equity and equality. Finally, for district-wide news, November 13th was World Kindness Day. November 11th was Veterans Day, and all schools took time to recognize and thank those who served our country. And also, as a result of the tech department's continuous hard work, Penfield will be fully one-to-one very soon. And today is National School-Related Professionals Day, so kudos to all of those who help students with their learning and keeping the building in shape. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abby. Anyone have on board any questions for Abby? Very well, thank you. This brings us to the superintendent's report. Dr. Putnam?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to have Abby do my report because she does such a nice job. So I think you mentioned a Scribner virtual bulletin board for the virtual teachers.
Yes.
So it's like we planned this because I have a picture of it in one of my slides. So
Great minds
nice
think alike.
job. Great minds do think alike. Nice job, Abby.
Thank you.
So this evening we've got, I just have a couple student and staff honors. I do have some updates, just district-wide updates. Then I'm going to turn over to Dr. Driffill, who's going to talk about our enrollment report as well as our budget factors, goals, and development guidelines for the 2021-2022 school year. That's difficult for me to say because it feels like the future. And then we're going to have Mr. Peiffer talk about Consolidated Title Grant overview and just provide for the board and community an overview of our title grant process and how that works. So, today, as Abby mentioned, is School-Related Professional Recognition Day. So on behalf of the district and the board, we just want to celebrate our dedicated support staff members who educate, transport, care for, and provide meals for our students. And so thank you very much for all of those individuals who make up a wonderful Team Penfield and support our students across the district. I didn't have a lot of staff and student honors, so I thought I'd just take a moment to give a shout-out honors to all of our students and staff. It's one of these things as I looked at planning for this meeting, and I think you heard it a bit from Mr. Buddington and Dr. Maloney in the regards to the amount of work that all of us are putting in. And when I say all of us, I mean our staff, but also our students and their families. And so just a couple of fun pictures here, whether it's robotics meeting virtually, our staff dressing up for events. That's one of the pictures down the bottom is Cobbles. They all dress like first responders. Our students wearing masks like champions. And you can see up there in the top right corner the virtually terrific thank you note bulletin board that Scribner made. And I'm just every day impressed when I get into the buildings about the resiliency of our students and our adult staff in regards to dealing with this COVID pandemic. And I just had a conversation today when I was at Bay Trail for most of the day. If you walk into the cafeteria, I'm telling you, I know kids are wearing masks. I know they're sitting 6 feet apart. And in September, it felt really weird. And now you walk in, and it takes a second, but it's like, oh, this is just like a middle school lunch. Like, they're just crazy and kooky and funny and eating their French toast sticks and having fun. And I say crazy and kooky in the most loving way because you know I have 2 middle school students. So it's just really interesting to watch. The kids are doing an amazing job, and the staff is learning more than they've ever had to learn in regards to instruction at a rapid pace. So I just want to say thank you to all of our students and all of our staff. For updates, the first is our one-to-one technology update. Very excited to say that we truly appreciate the patience we've received from our students, our staff, our families. Our latest shipment of laptops has arrived. I had a few sentences in here about supply chain and executive orders that slowed ships from overseas, and I decided I would just not rant about that and instead just focus on the positive, which is our technology services team is amazing. Jason DeLorenz was here a few weeks ago presenting, and they are now working on getting all those laptops ready to go, because you can't just buy it and then hand them the box. They have to take them all out. They have to image them. They have to put our software on. So there is hands-on laptops that has to happen before those laptops get to students' hands. So we were about 60%. We had about 40% left of our K through 5. About 40% of our students still needed a laptop. The 60% were there. Those 40% have been using a family laptop. They're sharing laptops. So thank you to our families who were able to say, you know what, we can get through. We'll make it work until they come in. And so it really was a team effort. But really good news is that if not by the end of this week, our goal is before Thanksgiving, everybody will have a laptop in hands. And then, believe it or not, in 3 months, Penfield is turned over into a one-to-one district. So thank you for all that work. Still lots of work to go, and still lots of planning, because this is not just a one-to-one initiative because of COVID. That definitely made our timeline go a lot faster, but we're committed to continuing the one-to-one initiative as we move into the future in Penfield. Pick My Kid. Families have received emails to set up an app or at least an account. You can use the webpage, but the district is moving to Pick My Kid for daily COVID wellness checks. Pick My Kid's an app that a number of districts around us use with great success for the wellness checks. It actually was designed not for COVID wellness. It's designed for picking up your students, for dismissal, for pickup, for parent drop-off. We are not using any of those functions. We may in the future if we decide we need to, but we're only using it for the COVID wellness checks, which are required when students are attending in-person school. It can be used through an app or right through the website. I want to share with the board, with the community, that it is 2D compliant. This board knows what those fun words mean, which is that it is compliant to law to make sure that we are protecting student privacy. It's purchased through BOCES. It's aidable. Did I say that right? All right, good. I want to double check with Dan. It's aidable. And, but also when we purchase software and programs through BOCES, they verify that it is 2D compliant. The contracts are supporting all of the privacy of our students. So the first day for Pick My Kid will be Thursday, November 19th. That's this week for cohorts B and C. So students who are in those two cohorts coming to school on those days will be using Pick My Kid. So as a reminder email will go out, but just to remember to make sure the app is up and running. They have great customer service, so any questions, you can call Pick My Kid directly and they can help you out. And they're open much later and longer than we are here in Penfield. So it's, they've been really good to work with. And then the first day for cohort A will be next Monday, the 23rd. It really is simple, and it's going to streamline our process. I just want to mention to the board, to the community, I did get a few emails and talk to a few parents who really like our process, how it is right now. So right now, if you're a parent and you're checking your kid in, it is pretty easy. It's a Microsoft form. You just have to go in and put last name, first name, grade level, and then answer the wellness questions. As a parent, I can tell you it is pretty easy. As a parent, I can also tell you sometimes I may misspell a name and it throws off when it gets to the building. So this is, Pick My Kid, is honestly, having done it, is easier than having to type everything in because it's already in the system. The name's already in there, the grade level's in there, you just have to do the wellness check. But I have to share with the board and the community the time saving on the other end. Right now, when we use a form, we get a list of everybody who completed the wellness check, and it's just a spreadsheet. We have to cross-reference that with everybody who's currently in school and only the A, B, or C cohorts. So in our elementary schools, it takes a couple hours. At our high school, it can take till midday before we can go through all of that data. With Pick My Kid, working with the local districts who are using it, and from our understanding and really being able to look at it, we've taken our time with this. That's why we didn't just shift to another system like Pick My Kid immediately when Frontline wasn't working for us for our students. We really, it'll really narrow that down to probably about a half hour because we can print out a list and actually use a list and manipulate the list to show all of the students who didn't fill it out and are in school that day. So it's really going to be huge for our staff savings. And when we talk about wanting to utilize our staff for what they're best at, right now simply trying to cross-reference two lists for hours during the day to make sure we do our COVID wellness is not the best use of their time, and it will free them up to do the work that they really are here for. So I really appreciate the community. We've gotten some wonderful emails too, like, wow, that was really simple to sign up. So if you have any questions, you can always reach out to your building principal. If you have questions about Pick My Kid, please don't hesitate to call the number in the email that we sent to all parents. So what we're all here for is COVID updates, yellow zone. So most of Monroe County was placed in the COVID yellow zone last week per New York State. You'll hear me maybe say per New York State a lot because this is not something that districts choose. This is not something that we have any control over. We literally got an email that said, by the way, you're in the yellow zone starting tomorrow. So the yellow zone guidance has continued to change throughout this past week. If you're following along since the board meetings in March, you probably have heard me say or read my emails that all of this changes on a regular basis. So my presentation, if we had a board meeting last week about the yellow zone, will be much different than it will be today. And so the districts now, I won't talk about what the yellow zone was going to be, I'll talk about what it is, Districts have 2 weeks to test 20% of their total in-person building staff and students. And that's really important to mention because we have hundreds of incredible staff members that aren't assigned to a building, including these lovely folks over here and myself, because we're at district office. We're not in a building, so we don't count for the required COVID testing. Unfortunately, neither does buildings and grounds, transportation. It's only building-based. And I share that because that is the rule set forth by New York State being in a yellow zone. So we have to test 20% of our total in-person building staff and students within 2 weeks. If, this is brand new, if our infection rate for Penfield with our 20% test is below the area's rate and is outside of that yellow zone, then the rules are is we can remain open and hold or stop in-school COVID testing until further notice. So we plan to have 20% completed by this Friday, but we may need to test on Monday and Tuesday of next week. We want to make sure that we got that 20% and we have to submit it into a state system. I will just mention that the test itself takes 10 seconds. You have to wait 15 minutes to get your result. It's going to take us hours to put that information into the database that we have to submit to New York State. So it's really interesting. It's the end use. It's the data we have to put in, which is extremely time-consuming and pulling staff. So a huge thank you to Kathy Harris, our nurse coordinator, who we pulled out of Scribner and backfilled with a substitute, one of our regular float nurses, who's been doing a great job. So Kathy can do this nonstop. Thank you to Scott Dreschler, our Director of Special Education, who has been working with buildings to make sure that we're following the process and doing everything right. Thank you to Jim Peiffer, to Barb Gregory, to Dan Driffill, who keeps signing checks so we can make this work. So it really is huge. Alan McNiff, in terms of all the custodians, having to build up the test site to make sure that the flow is right, our building principals. Marcia Vick, who is a dynamite with data and is working on helping us upload that. Nahala from Haffen, I want to say it right, Haffen from HR, I apologize, from HR, who also stepped in to help with all the data integration. I know I'm forgetting people, but I just want to share just some names so you know how much work is going into something that we're required to do. So a little bit about the test. It's the Abbott Benix Now, which is the test we're using. We don't have a choice. It was given to us. It's actually, there's lots of data out there around how reliable it is, how is it working. I can tell you now that across Monroe County, there's a handful of positives and hundreds, and we're heading into thousands of negative tests. So it's working, it's going to work to lower our countywide numbers. The test uses a quick nasal swab. This is not the intrusive deep nasal test you've heard so much about or had. Consent forms were sent to parents via Infinite Campus so we could track exactly who said yes and who said no. It is a choice. And now I'd like to show you 3 videos. The first one, Dan's getting ready for us now, is I'm going to walk you through what the test looks like from when you register to when you get the test. I'm Dr. Putnam, Superintendent of the Penfield Central School District. That's me. I'm not wearing my mask because I'm more than 6 feet away from everybody, but we're going to show you how the COVID testing works in school right now with a very special guest. Special guest! Look who it is. It's our friendly Patriot mascot. Come on in. You're going to check in at the registration desk. Come on over.
First, we need you to check your name, your date of birth, your phone number, your address, and your ethnicity. So if you wouldn't mind, give you a hand here. Excellent. If you wouldn't mind just checking that information over. Perfect.
All right.
Then what I'm going to ask you to do is take this registration sheet. I'm going to have you head towards the testing center. Perfect.
All right, Patriot, come this way. You're going to walk right down this middle aisle where there are cones marked 6 feet apart. So if there were a line, you would be 6 feet away from the next person getting tested. So you're going to come right over here to our lovely athletic director, Mr. Shambo, who's going to be your tester today.
Hey, Patriot, how you doing?
We thought it was appropriate that the athletic director conduct the test on our mascot.
There you go.
So the Patriot would use some hand sanitizer now. Make sure that their hands are clean.
This is the easiest test you're going to take today. We have a swab, there's a soft end and a stick end. And I'm going to take it, and because I think it's going to be tough for you to get up there on your beak, I'm going to do this one for you. Normally this is self-administered. So we're going to take the stick. We've got the swabby end. We're going to go around each nostril 5 times on each side, and then you're going to hold on to this for me, okay? Notice that the bird's nostrils are in a little bit different location than yours. I'm going to ask you to hold this for me, please. Thank you. You got it? You got it? That's hard with those claws, I know. So, Patriot, how was it? Painful? Awesome. And then you're just going to give me a second, Patriot, while I prep the test for you. So that was all you have to do. And then the test administrator will put 6 drops of a solution into the test kit, and then they will put your swab into that test kit. And that, my friend, is as easy as it is. And we will let you know if there is anything more we need to do. Thank you. Awesome. And just so you know, that test then comes over to a timetable where it will be timed for 15 minutes. And in 15 minutes, we will know what the response is. Hey, Patriot, thank you so very much. You can go back to class. Have a great day. That is as easy as it is. I have 2 other short videos. They're very short, but I want to show you actual students getting the test conducted. Is a wonderful 5th grader. And now I'll show you a 3rd grader as well. If these 2 wonderful kids can do this, you'll see piece of cake. She told me after, it tickles. So thank you to our incredible real models and our Patriot and everybody else. But I wanted to show you what the process looks like, because we ultimately have lots of questions of what it looks like, and we know about the deep swab test, and this is not it. At the high school, middle school, and when we get to elementary schools, even our older kids can self-administer. So they actually hold the Q-tip and put it to their nostril and just spin it in their nostril 5 times in each nostril. And so the youngest kids, we would help them with that. I will say, even though we had Mr. Shambo, our athletic director, conducting the test on our mascot, that was Mrs. Harris, our nurse, conducting on the 2 students. We are contracting with an outside agency to bring some other nurses, trained nurses in to do the test. We're not pulling our school nurses because they also have a full-time job of supporting all of our kids in the buildings. We do have a number of administrators trained per Dr. Mendoza, the Monroe County Department of Health, and the instructions on the test. It does not need to be a medical person who actually conducts the test. However, we want to make sure that we have as many nurses conducting as possible for the comfort level of our students and our families. And so the next slide here is I planned ahead. So if the videos weren't going to work, I wanted to show you some pictures of kids and talk you through it. So here are there's a photo of the 2 young ladies who you saw on video. There are 3 students from Bay Trail there. I can tell you they were all smiling under their mask because I said smile, and they all said the same thing, which was, "You're not going to see it." And I said, "I can figure it out." So they're smiling. But I also wanted to show you just a couple of pictures of our LCE class here in the high school. It's our students, some students with disabilities who were really nervous about the test. And their teacher, Mrs. Kradowski, said, "Can we please come down and get just a view?" They're really nervous about it. They've heard about it. They're hearing about it. And whether their parents consented or not, it doesn't matter. They wanted to use it as a learning opportunity. So it worked out perfect. Mascot came down to get them. We walked through. They got to watch it. They got to walk through and see somebody. Their teacher actually is not on camera. The teacher had the test done in order for them to see it. And so it was a great opportunity. We actually had like 4 kids who were like, "I want to go right now." And I was like, "Well, no, we're not doing students today. We're just doing staff." But they were like ready to go. So again, just trying to help and support. Jim Peiffer and I and others were at Bay Trail today, and I think that, as much as this is a concerning piece, something we never thought we'd be doing in school, the laid-back feeling from the students was they were like it was no big deal. And so we really thank them and thank the parents who consented so we could get this done and meet our obligation. But again, we tried to have a little bit of fun with it. Today, I think kids got Jolly Ranchers, so, it was, I'll do just about anything for a Jolly Rancher. So it worked out well, and we appreciate that. So the last COVID slide I have, and this is going to be going out tomorrow. It is, Dr. Mendoza tweeted it out. It is a public document now. But this is the flow chart. So if a student or staff member tests positive with the rapid test in school, if they test negative, no further action. They go back to class, and parents will receive an email through Infinite Campus that says, "Thank you, we tested your child, they're negative." Just so you know your child was tested and you know the result was negative. If it's positive, we have to follow our COVID process. So you'll not just get an email, you'll get a call, and you'll have to come in and pick up your child. And if the student or staff is asymptomatic, so that's the one right down the middle, if they're asymptomatic and they haven't been exposed in the past 14 days, they can go get another test, a more traditional nasal swab, and if they do that within 48 hours and have a negative result, they can come back to school because it will be deemed that they are negative. And if it's positive, then you got to follow the Department of Health quarantining and stay out until you've got 14 days and a negative test. If this is interesting, if the student or staff member is symptomatic, then the rapid test is true and you don't have an option to go get another test to try. But our process in schools is we're not seeing symptomatic people coming into school, so we don't see that being an issue, but we'll take that as it is. So that's the process we're working through now. I do want to note, because I did get a question, is that if you are asymptomatic, your insurance may not cover the cost of a test if you're asymptomatic. Many insurance companies are working with families, many doctors are working with families, but if there is an issue, then Monroe County Department of Health wants to always remind people that they are doing free testing at MCC every day. So if it's an insurance or a cost and your insurance company is saying you're asymptomatic, so we're not going to cover a test, well, we want your kids back in school as soon as we can, so please don't forget about MCC. You can go there and get a free test. Let's talk about something other than COVID, sort of. Winter athletics. So winter athletics, we know Abby talked a little bit about our fall season was running. Winter athletics decision, I wanted the community to remember that decisions on which sports are allowed to run comes not from the district, but from New York State. And although the districts can choose to be more restrictive, Penfield understands the need and the positive social emotional connections that come from offering athletics to our students. So The winter, we are now allowed to offer the following sports: bowling, gymnastics, indoor track and field, skiing, swimming, and diving. These are considered by New York State low or moderate risk, so we are moving ahead and working towards these sports being able to run for winter. We just learned today that the more moderate to high risk, such as basketball, which is typically a winter sport, is put on hold until January 4th. And before January 4th, the state will make a decision on what else to offer, and we will communicate through our athletic department that process of what is allowed. And if we can do it, and we can do it safely, we're happy to get as many sports running in a safe way as possible. Questions? Awesome.
The rapid COVID testing. So I understand that the rapid testing is likely going to act as a snapshot of the Penfield district to see how severe COVID is. Is there any concern about students contracting the virus after the test comes back negative, per se?
Absolutely. So it's a great question. So I'm going to be very honest with you, Abby, with our board, and with our community. The purpose of these rapid tests and why we have to do them in school is truly to lower our county average of infection rate. So whether you get a rapid COVID test in school, or you go and get a COVID test because you had a cold and you thought maybe it was COVID and it comes back negative, you're 100% right that the next day, if your behaviors are not following COVID protocol, you are still going to be at risk. So we know in schools, and the term that's been thrown around by Dr. Mendoza and the Monroe County Department of Health is schools are the gold standard for COVID precautions. Although we have had positive staff and positive students since September, and we report those out to the state, we email families, there has yet to be a transmission that between student in the building or staff in the building. And it's because we're wearing masks, which not everybody loves, but it's part of the protocol, and we're every chance we can being 6 feet apart. So in order to be considered exposure to COVID, you have to be around somebody less than 6 feet, both of you with no mask, for 15 minutes or more. And so if you think about your school day, that should never be happening. I hope you're nodding your head because that's never happening in school?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Whew. All right. So that is what we're doing. So we're really, the protocols in schools are great. I will tell you that from talking to Dr. Mendoza, there is a concern with doing 20,000 school-based tests in Monroe County, because the number will probably be about 20,000 tests will go into the system on Friday from all the schools in Monroe County. And the concern is, if it lowers our infection rate to a very low number, will there be a false sense of security across our community that, hey, we're back down to 1%, so we don't need to wear masks. We don't need to follow the rules. And that's a concern, because we all have to take it seriously if it's truly going to all of us staying safe until there's a vaccine at some point. So I think it's a great question is, yes, if you get the test in 8th period PE class and it's negative, what you do that afternoon, whether you're a student or staff, can quickly change what the result would be if you unfortunately aren't taking those COVID precautions. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank
Awesome.
you.
I'm glad you asked one. Thank you.
Anyone else? Lisa?
I have two questions, actually, if that's okay. The 20% of total in-person building staff and students, is that collectively together, or is it 20% of that building staff and
It's a great question, because we had that question. So the 20% is you take all of your building staff, and all of our building staff work in person, so even our remote teachers are coming to school. And you take all of your students who attend in person, and then it's 20% of that combined number. So what we are trying to do is get as many staff members this first week who are willing to do it, and as many of our older students. So right now the plan between now and Friday is only going to be testing at Bay Trail and the high school. If we need to, we're going to move to test at elementary schools next week so we don't retest our high school and middle school students. But we'll share that information out on where we're testing before we do. We're still trying to finalize that. But that exact reason is that 20% combined, so our number could be more heavily adults. And we have some incredible adults I'll just share, is that our goal is to, when we first got the yellow zone, it was like you had to do 20% a week for 5 weeks to get 100%. But then they shared and said, you know what, if you don't consent, you can still come to school, and therefore we're just going to have to test people more often who did consent. And it was great because we had so many Penfield staff say, I'll test every week if it means a student doesn't need to get tested who doesn't want to get tested. So we're working through that process and trying to be age appropriate, and our high school and middle school kids really had no issues with it. So does that answer your question?
It does.
All right, great.
Thank
That was your first question.
That's my second question is, are we able to easily track COVID costs, and not just like hand sanitizer, but like indirect costs?
Yeah, that's so.
as well?
Can we monitor and collect COVID costs? I do by the gray hair in Dr. Driffill's side. As you can tell, we're okay now, but even though he wears a mask, his eyes get big. Yes, we can, and we're continuing to try to build that, working with Alan. I mentioned we're bringing in contract nurses. There's a cost to that,
Right.
but hopefully it won't have to be for that long. But there's that ease level too, so there's lots of cost when it comes to PPE. The tests don't cost us anything; they were delivered. But then there is sort of I don't know what the word is. Is it soft cost? It's
like
the
indirect costs,
indirect
right?
cost. It's
Yeah.
the time, the
That's-
amount
I
of
guess
time.
that's what I'm thinking too, yeah.
It has been tough
Right.
to categorize, I think. And this whole year, we've had some conversations at the administration level about trying to quantify how much money we spent because people are doing things related to COVID instead of what they were doing over here. That's really tough to do because this year is so different all across the board. But our direct costs, we can absolutely track and keep an eye on, and continue to work through to try to advocate why we need funding to cover our costs.
Thank you.
Board, any other questions? I was just going to ask if you could speak to, you're talking about consent. What has been the experience in terms of parental consent?
So we tried something new this time, which is Infinite Campus, our student management system we have, does have an ability to send surveys out through Infinite Campus. What that means is when a parent answers those survey questions, it goes right into Infinite Campus. So it's really great data because when we do a Microsoft form, it's a spreadsheet that we have to go through. When you do an Infinite Campus survey, it goes right there. And I know you're asking about consent and probably percentages, but I wanted to share this because I'm glad we did it that way, although it's a little frustrating, because we learned that there are a number of parents who never set up an Infinite Campus account. So they didn't get the consent form. So if they don't have an email, if they don't have an Infinite Campus account to check their kids' attendance, to check their students' grades, to connect with teachers, they wouldn't have gotten the consent form. And so I'm glad we did it this way, because if we were going to do a survey through that for something else that we really need the data for, immediately, we have to do some work. So I think that we've learned that as we look towards next year, if we're going to use the Infinite Campus survey tool, we really need to do a push ahead of time to make sure everybody has an Infinite Campus account. So the consent I can't give you a percentage right now. I would tell you though that it's going to meet our needs. That's what I'll tell you. It's going to meet our needs. We're going to have enough people who consented. You talk about time. I want to thank Mr. Peiffer here. He and I had a list. Marcia Vick, one of our incredible data folks, pulled us a list of everybody who didn't fill out the consent, yes or no. And then today at Bay Trail, we made phone calls to those parents saying, we don't have consent, yes or no, we'd like to talk to you about it. And we probably got maybe 20 parents who said, oh, I thought I did, or I couldn't get into Infinite Campus. And so we were able to test 20 more students with verbal consent and going through, which is why it was Jim and I who made the phone calls from our level to make sure that we had those clear conversations. And a couple times we talked with people who were a little concerned, and we said, okay, we're not going to take a consent here. If you have any hesitation, take your time. And parents are still thinking about it too. Up until before our meeting, I've been emailing a couple parents who have really good questions about it. So one of the things is, if we consent to this test, am I consenting for any other tests in the future? And the answer is absolutely not. This consent is only for this test we're giving now. The other thing I'll share with you is that we learned that in the consent form, because it's very legal, and lawyers wrote it, and they're wonderful, but it references about the potential of having to seek compensation from your insurance company. And so that is, everybody in the county used the same consent form. That is unfortunately not accurate. Because the state gave us the test, we're not seeking any funding from anybody's insurance, or nobody's personally has to pay for the test. And so we've got, I would say, if I had to make an educated guess now, we have more than half of the people saying yes to the consent. We'd like to see more. If we have to continue doing this, we are going to do another push, encouraging to sign up for Infinite Campus and try to make sure we get everybody in there who wants to consent. And if you don't want to, you still come to school. The impact of saying no is simply that the students who say yes and the staff who say yes might have to be tested more often. But I think as you saw the test, it takes 10 seconds and then they're on their way. It's a long answer to a short question. I apologize.
Tom, I have one question here. And I apologize if you already said this. Are parents being notified if their child was tested and was negative?
Yes. So through Infinite Campus, they will receive an email that says that their child was tested. It's got other information in there, but that the test was negative.
Okay.
And so the first round of those went out today. The two young ladies you saw in the video did not get that email because their father was standing there with them, happens to be a staff member. So it worked out well. I did not email the mascot. I told the mascot. But as a parent, I can tell you, one of my children was tested today, and I got the email from Infinite Campus that came through to my email just explaining it, and it made me feel good because I knew that they got tested and that they it was negative. The other piece is that, just so you know, the principals, like Mr. Buddington, sent an email yesterday saying that Bay Trail PE class would be tested today. So the parents will get an email from the principal the day before we test there that it's a possibility your child might be tested, and then you'll get an email that if it's negative.
I just have one more question too, sorry.
Yeah.
Are you allowing outside groups to meet at school yet, or is it still?
We're still holding on the outside groups. I think we need to talk about it continuously, but we'll revisit after Thanksgiving.
Awesome, thanks.
Is that good?
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you.
So before I turn on, I thought you were going to ask, but I am going to stay as a superintendent. I know you watched the video and thought he would do great on The Price is Right, but I'm going to stay as a superintendent.
Totally thought that.
All right? Awesome. My video skills and acting is not nearly as good as I want it to be.
Jeopardy.
I will now thankfully stop talking and turn it over to Dr. Driffill, who's going to give us a report on enrollment and budget factors, goals, and development guidelines for our next budget.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope those watching at home are staying warm on this cold night. In your packet this evening are two reports. One is an in-depth enrollment report, our 2020 enrollment report based on Beds Day, which you may or may not know is always the first week of October is when you take your official enrollment for the year. So you have the month of September to kind of let things migrate and settle in. Enrollment was down this year, so we'll get into that. But then also on the budget side, we have some goals, some guidelines, and some initial factors that go more into depth in your reporting, but to have an executive kind of summary this evening, not only for you, but for the community to know where we're at in terms of our budget thinking at this stage. So the district has had a long-standing set of goals in our budget development process, chiefly aligning program to mission and vision. Sometimes for better or worse, in some organizations, these words kind of become quote-unquote shelf art, and they aren't really honored. I think Penfield's done a great job over the years of really honoring these commitments to inform our decision-making. Everything we do within the budget will be educationally and fiscally sound from both the lens of efficiency and effectiveness. We always seek legal adherence, not only to federal legislation, but state law, as we have become well aware, all the way down to board policies. As Dr. Maloney and Mr. Buddington talked about earlier, we always try to seek and leverage partnerships in our community. We see ourselves as a partner, not just in the education of our kids, but in the whole community's spectrum. In terms of instructional programs, instructional goals, we're always looking to prioritize college and career readiness through our curriculum and maintain our program excellence. Penfield has a long-standing history of lofty aspirations, successful academic achievement amongst our kiddos. But not only that, we literally look to the whole child by ensuring that social emotional learning remains a priority, particularly this year through the lens of equity in all of our decision making. And as Dr. Putnam mentioned, we have been trying to keep technological considerations in mind. And that's not just our devices, but it's our security, it's our support, it's the infrastructure that goes along with it. It's one thing to just deploy devices out into our system, but if they're not well supported, well networked, we're not going to achieve our objectives. So moving on to kind of guidelines, parameters, where we're thinking in terms of budget. We've always had long-standing class size commitments through collective bargaining or past practice at the upper end of things, but also on the lower end of things. So if we don't see our students engaging in particular coursework, the Board of Education Administration evaluates the merits of those offerings moving forward. Chiefly correlated is staffing analysis. Enrollment obviously drives our instructional staffing, but also just through the needs of all of our learners. And there are different situations across our district spectrum that we take into account, again, honoring that whole child experience. And then that also extends to our support staff as well, our non-instructional staff, to ensure that, again, we're balancing that efficiency and effectiveness in all that we do. In the report, it goes very in-depth about all of the professional development commitments that we have as a district, particularly around our instruction and curriculum and all of the associated curriculum writing and TOSAs and director work that we do through budgetary positions allocated to those endeavors. Materials, supplies, and professional development allocations in the buildings have historically been capped at 2% increases year over year. We're going to tentatively plan to continue with that methodology, but I'll let you know if something changes there. Instructional resources in this specific example means things like our textbooks, things like library materials, things like our software, real physical books, as kids still read real physical books. For these, we always try to utilize instructional material aid from the state or purchase these through BOCES to leverage the aid associated, again, to try to be effective in our procurement. Operational excellence speaks to our O&M staff, our operations and maintenance, looking to be very effective to provide a clean, safe, secure learning environment for our staff and our students. And then long-range planning. So at our next board meeting, we will look at our reserve plan. So that always kind of takes a look at where we've been with our fund balance, where we're planning to go with our fund balance. This has instructional commitments. Where are we in terms of enrollment? Where are we in terms of programming? What kind of decisions is the state making in terms of requirements? But then also capital planning as well and facilities. So what do we know now? We know that we have to be very humble in what our knowledge is and what we think our knowledge is. So at this nascent point of the budget development process, we know a couple things that we'll cover tonight. One, we know what our enrollment is for the year. Two, we have some initial information around what our revenues are going to be, both state and local. And then we have some initial information around what some of our expenditures are going to be. So first, we'll take a look at enrollment. Before we jump into this year's enrollment, I think it's important to provide a little bit of context to see kind of where we've been. You probably are aware that New York, writ large, has had a decline in population over the years. And that, coupled with a decline in birth rates, has traditionally around the state led to decreased enrollments. Penfield has not really experienced this. You could kind of see over the last dozen years that we've been very stable, hovering a little over that 4,500 student mark. The line chart that is a little difficult to see here is the free and reduced percentage population. So you can see in the last 12 years, we've gone from about 7% free and reduced population socioeconomically to a little over 20%. So a 3 times increase in just 10 years. So while the actual enrollment has stayed equal, this share of our population has increased a little bit. So I think that for a board, policy decision makers, that's an important factoid to be aware of. So that brings us to the current year enrollment. So last year, the 2019-2020 school year, we had 4,599, almost 4,600 kids. We were projecting, based on our forecasting methodology, to increase that 18 kids to 4,617. And what we actually had on beds this year was 4,456, which resulted in a loss of 143 students, so a little over 3%. Relative to our projection, it was a decrease of 160 kids, so we quote-unquote missed in our projection by 160 kiddos. This is not uncommon. From talking to other districts around the county, other districts around the region, we've seen declining enrollment from 2% all the way up to 6%. Here locally, we saw a big increase in our homeschool population. We saw a few, less than 20, move to non-public schools, private school offerings. And then just year over year, we had a big increase from our our seniors that graduated to the incoming kindergartners. So we had 370 kids graduate and only 320 kindergartners come in. So that was a loss of 50 right there. So despite that year-over-year aberration, if you look at our methodology over the course of 5 years, we've actually been pretty close. So back in 2015, we projected that in the current year we would have 4,539, and ended up being 98% accurate. So within 2% across all of the grade spectrums. That was better than where we were with last year's 5-year projection. Things change, and as we'll discuss in a moment, things will continuously change, and this is not a set it and forget it, put it on the wall. It's just the first data point of where we are in our budget planning for next year. So next year's projection expects a small increase. So it's very difficult to qualitatively understand maybe how many kids will be coming back into our population next year, depending on what happens with the pandemic, what happens with our ability to offer in-person instruction. It becomes very subjective. So for now, we're sticking with the quantitative methodology. We have chiefly used a 3-year moving average, so it's not just looking at this current year, it's looking at the past 2 years. We have a very interesting approach when it comes to kindergarten enrollment. We don't strictly look at our census or the number of birth through 4-year-olds we have. We look at percentage of the Monroe County live birth rate, because what we've seen over the years is a lot of families moving into Penfield before kiddos start school. So again, just a very early projection. It's a starting point. This year, more than ever, we will really have to rely on communication with our preschools. Try to really encourage kindergarten enrollment early. Typically, I don't know if it's necessarily the same here, but you sometimes have kindergarten enrollment all the way up until the end of August. So we'll definitely work in our communication to try to have established numbers as early as possible. So on the revenue side of the equation, we have some initial factors that play into our tax cap calculation, which is our local levy funding. The allowable growth factor, so this is the number that is measured by the CPI or 2% as a cap, whatever is more applicable. This year through October, the CPI is trending a little over 1.2%. So in the 10 years that this formula has been running, the allowable growth factor has been under 2% about half the time. This year certainly looks like we're going to be under 2%. We don't know exactly what the next 2 months are going to bring in terms of data. We'll have a final answer about mid-January. But I think it's safe to assume that that number will be less than 2%. So that constrains our revenue ability, so long as we want to stay within the tax cap. The tax base growth factor should hopefully be available next month. And that calculates new permit building within our locality. That's kind of been all over the place. You see home construction confidence is high, but then you see projects stalled. So I don't really have a good barometer of where that's going to land, but we'll know sooner rather than later. State funding continues to be as clear as mud. So we do know that the governor has built into the budget this year with the legislature these triggers, the next of which happens on December 31st, whereas they can modify the state budget and potentially withhold aid to schools as a mid-year reduction of up to 20%. Thus far, they have kind of said, the comptroller telegraphed again recently, that schools shouldn't take any rash action, stay patient. They believe that there's going to additionally be some federal stimulus in the future, but as you move down below, the governor has said that, well, at this point he doesn't expect any action until the Georgia Senate seats are settled, those runoff elections, which are now, still another 6-7 weeks away. So I think at this point it's hurry up and wait again and see where we land. Another development that came through that was discouraging and disappointing that I'm sure you saw probably in some of your school board messaging was that the state came out and reiterated that transportation expenses from March to June would not be eligible for aid, because the way the legislation is written is that it's truly only for the transport of kids. And because we were shut down, we did not transport any kids. However, in accordance with the CARES Act and the governor's executive orders, we were led to believe that we needed to certainly continue paying those folks. And they were doing a lot of great work, keeping the fleet up to date. We were delivering meals to kids. There was some things happening there. There's some reason for optimism. There's already been legislation pushed. I know the Board of Regents is going to push for it. That would make this retroactively codified as aid. But at this point, that'll definitely be one of our chief talking points with legislators as we move into the spring. So we'll continue to have these conversations. A 20% aid cut would be very difficult for Penfield schools. State aid amounts to about a third of our total operating budget, mid $35 million or so. So we're talking about quite a bit of money. So looking where we've been with state aid and looking where we're going, this goes into depth in your report in the packet, but this year foundation aid was completely flat. We didn't see an additional dollar of foundation aid, and that green bar shows the gap in funding where we should be in accordance with the state's formula. And you can kind of see that when the gap elimination program was in effect right after the financial crisis, things got kind of bubbled up, and then as the state budget improved, 15, 16, 17, things started to get a little better. And then in the last handful of years, you can kind of see things ramping back up again relative to what the state is saying we should get versus what the governor and legislature have actually provided for our schools. So in total, just in foundational aid alone, we've been theoretically shorted over $60 million. So just a staggering sum of money. We have also started to learn about a couple rate information. So you're probably aware that all public schools in New York State are required to participate in two pension programs, the employer's retirement system and the teacher's retirement system. On the ERS side, the employees' retirement system, which is traditionally our non-instructional staff, the employer contribution rate is scheduled to increase this year. So for the current year, it was 14.6%, which has basically been flat the last 2 or 3 years. So that bumps up to 16.2% next year. Now, the employer contribution rate is dependent upon how the fund itself is performing in the markets. And the markets, despite the volatility this year, have actually been up a little bit from January 1st. So the ERS system is saying that this is due to a surge in retirements that they didn't actuarially estimate, presumably related to the COVID pandemic. So while it's only increasing that 1.6 basis points, that's a 10% increase for us. It's 11% increase. So that amounts to, it's a six-figure increase. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. So while it's not a 2% basis points or 4 basis points increase, it's a little more than we were expecting given the performance of the market. The TRS system doesn't give a hard number, usually until earlier in the calendar year, probably first week of February we'll have a better answer, but they've given us a range. So the range for next year's contribution rate would be 9.5 to 10% of earnings of people in that classification. The current year is 9.53, so it's relatively stable year over year, which makes some intuitive sense given the performance of the market. So even if it came in at 10%, at worst it would be a 5% increase for us year over year. So more information to come on that. And then also late, I didn't put a slide in, we have some health information on health rates for the calendar year 2021. So as you may know, we participate in a consortium with other school districts. It's called the RASH plan. I always find that acronym very funny for healthcare. The primary composite rate is good news. So next year, most of our plans are only going to increase 4% in premiums. This is primarily due to lack of claims this year, lack of healthcare utilization. So despite a pandemic that's been ravaging hospitals, hospitals delayed a lot of surgeries and people delayed a lot of care, and they were doing telemedicine instead of going in to see their doctor. So some actual costs were contained. Now they've built into their assumptions next year that some of those things might explode, but still kind of good news for where we are. We do have a legacy plan, the extended plan, that is going to increase more so. And then we also have some other old consortium plans that are going to increase more, closer to trend, around 8 or 9%. But by and large, the majority of our active employees will be just at 4% healthcare premiums increase for next year, which is good because traditionally we've been closer to double digits, 10, 11, 12%. And dental insurance will be flat next year as well, based on claims in the current calendar year. The one thing to mention with how this runs concurrent to next year's budget cycle is this is only for calendar year 2021. So we don't know what the other 6 months of our fiscal year will look like. Typically, we've built that in as an assumption of trend, somewhere in that 10, 11, 12% range. But hopefully through the spring's budget development, we'll have a little bit more clarity. We can kind of isolate that number a little closer. So that's where we know where we stand in November. We'll continue to have these conversations basically at every meeting, all the way until April or so. So, any questions, not with just the material I covered this evening, but anything that was contained in the larger packet reports?
Board, any questions for Dr. Driffill? Yeah. Okay, of course. Lisa?
I'm representing, I guess, questions tonight. The 20% withholdings that we had over the summer, and then, or whatever, you can please clarify, because I'm not saying this correctly, and then they decided they weren't doing that come September. Or where are we there? If you could
Great
explain,
question. So there's been a couple aid payments that have been quote unquote withheld. So those were the July and August payments, which typically don't amount for a lot. Some summer programming that we do. But then also the year-end BOCES surplus payment, which amounted to a couple $100,000. So those are currently still held. They're in abeyance. They've been very careful not to use the word reduced. As September was coming, schools were getting very nervous because that 20% would really represent cash flow issues. So they went away from that withholding approach, So schools were made whole in September on their aid payments. They were made whole in October. As far as we've been told, will continue to be made whole for November and December. We haven't heard anything into the next calendar year. And as far as we know, those withholdings will be made whole as well. I guess at this point they reserve the right in their rhetoric and their, warnings, quote unquote, to eventually reduce those monies. But there's, debate around whether or not they would need legislative approval to do some things. So where we are is we're short a little on withholdings, a couple $100,000, $300,000-$400,000, which sounds like a lot of money. But in the context of a $100 million budget, it's just something that we're keeping on the books as a receivable. So that's everything we've been told. But for now, that's where we stand, and if anything changes, I'll be sure to report back.
Thank you.
Board, any other questions? Okay. I have a couple here, and if they're for another meeting, just let me know, because, there may be something you have scheduled.
Sure.
The free meals, where are we on that? And that's all basically grant money, essentially, or funded money.
So the current year?
Yes.
Yep, so this is all USDA waivers currently that we're operating under. So it's not even a state program, it's a federal program. And as we stand now, they've extended that waiver all the way to the end of the school year.
Oh,
So
the
June
new school
30th.
year.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So that was a recent development. Originally, they had said continue as normal. And then I think it was the very last week of August, we got notice that, okay, starting school in a week, we will continue under the waivers that were put into place in the spring. But the caveat was that only until the end of the calendar year, December 31st, or until the funding runs out.
Right.
So it was very nebulous. It was up in the air. Some districts didn't want to commit to it because they didn't want families to be up against it. But at this point, there was a late development that they're planning to fund that, extend that program through all the way through June. So we'll make sure we get out that communication, relatively soon.
Okay. And then the other question, but again, this may be for another time, another meeting, is where Penfield is on their property assessment.
So as far as I know, they were looking to do a reassessment this past year, and things were delayed. So I guess the question will be whether or not they do it again in the spring. So if you recall back to our tax conversations in August, all 6 of our towns are currently under their level of assessment. Their equalization rate is under 100%. So usually in a normal environment, that would signal to the assessor that they would want to reassess. But I haven't gotten any indication from the town, any of our towns, that they're going to do that at this point. So it's one of those stay tuned type of
So from a time perspective, if they did it in the spring, would that be reflected in the equalization rate for this upcoming budget cycle?
Yep, so the timeline would be the towns would do the reassessments. They would submit, I think it's by March 1st, what their tentative assessments are. Then you have the opportunity to challenge it for 60 days or so. Then there's an update in May, and then it's final in July, and those would be the assessment numbers that we use for next year's tax collection.
And I guess the last one is, we talk about transport reimbursements. We didn't do any transport, any student transport over the summer, those closed months? I mean, for again, non-district students, out of any of that kind of thing?
I wasn't here, but not that I'm familiar with.
No.
Nothing.
Because when we were under emergency closure starting on March 16th, all schools were under emergency closing. So there were no programs where we may have been transporting to BOCES or to our private schools. They were also fully remote.
Okay.
So there was no transportation there. Although, as Dan mentioned, many of them were still working and coming in, maintaining the fleet and things like that. And there are other districts who are really, I think, even, I know we're here for Penfield, but there are districts that use their transportation, especially with really high rates of poverty, to transport meals every day to families, because we believed that we were going to be reimbursed for those funds. We were going to get transportation aid. And so I do, many of our rural communities around us are really going to be in a really tough situation with that. We all are, but I think it's going to hit harder in some places.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, so now I'll turn it over to Mr. Peiffer, who's going to talk us through a little around the Consolidated Grant Overview.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam. It's not often you guys look to me to talk about money, so this will be an interesting change. I'll try to keep it interesting anyway. Really, the questions I'm hoping to be able to answer for you or have you be able to answer after this quick little session here is, what are the federal consolidated grants? How is funding for these grants determined? How do we use the grants and what are their intended purposes? And then I think the driving question behind the request for this presentation is how and why are these funds shared with non-public schools within the district? So hopefully we'll be able to increase everybody's understanding in that regard here soon. Some of this information will be familiar. You know, Sean's heard this presentation in her role with the Indian Landing PTA, Emily maybe with the Cobbles PTA at some point. Mark, maybe you were sitting in on one of the community meetings in the summer, I think maybe we had. So some of you have seen parts of this, but the consolidated grants there's really 4 parts to it. Title I is really referred to as Title I Part A, improving basic programs. Title II is supporting effective instruction. Title III is services for our English language learners and our immigrant students. And then Title IV is student support and academic enrichment programs. So those are kind of just the general titles for each of those 4 parts of the consolidated grant. Notice this does not include IDEA, which is the federal grant that supports our students with disabilities. That's a separate grant and completely different process that Scott Dreschler, our director of PPS, oversees. So Title I, and I can't see that screen over there, so I got to move for this, is really funding for a district is determined by our federal poverty data from 2 years prior in the federal census. And the federal level of poverty that they use is different than just the level of poverty that's used to determine free and reduced price lunch. So they're 2 different factors. However, distribution within a district is determined by the free and reduced price lunch rates from the beds a day of the prior year. And then we use that data again to determine the allocation of funds within the district to identified buildings. And the purpose of these funds under Title I is to support students who are failing or at risk of failure in identified buildings. There we go, we're skipping around. What does that look like in Penfield? We use the funds in Penfield. Our buildings that are identified here are typically Cobbles and Indian Landing. The way that that's done is they look at the district average of percentage of free and reduced price lunches, and then for a building to be targeted as a Title I assistance building, it has to have that percentage be at or above the district average. Indian Landing and Cobbles are consistently in that range. Occasionally Bay Trail will bounce in and just make it. The high school, I think, has qualified potentially once in my time here. You don't get any more money. Right, the allocation is determined by that federal poverty data, and the district is designated to get so much more money. So by allocating or identifying more buildings, all you're doing is spreading that money more thinly across the district on a per pupil basis. And that can become a little bit more difficult then to spend the money in a meaningful way and really have an impact on kids. So we have pretty much consistently stuck with Indian Landing and Cobbles to really target those funds within our RTI programs and help students who are failing or at risk of failure within those programs. So we use it, we actually fund additional reading teachers, literacy specialists at both buildings, one additional staff member in that regard. We use it for professional development opportunities for the literacy specialists and math interventionists at Cobbles and Indian Landing. We have in the past purchased additional technology for those students in those programs, as well as funded professional learning opportunities for those teachers. They're very strict with these funds. They have to be targeted and used only by students who are failing or at risk of failure. When we buy materials and technology, they have to go through an inventory process and be tagged. There are audits about every 2 to 3 years. We come through and they do a desk audit typically, but occasionally auditors will come through. They'll pull purchase orders. They'll want to see where those items are, make sure they have the tags and that they're in the proper classrooms with the proper staff. So it's very strict in how you spend the money and making sure that it's for those students who need it. It is important to note that you can't target the funds, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. You can't target the funds that are generated by the students who receive free and reduced lunch in those 2 buildings at those students. any student in those buildings who is failing or at risk of failure is qualified then to receive the benefits of those funds. So it's actually illegal to target students who are in poverty with the support of the funds. It has to be based on their academic situation. So that's just a quick overview of Title I and how it's used. Title II is, again, this is focused on supporting effective instruction. And so what that really means is looking at professional development for all teachers and administrators. This funding for this is determined by our population and then again federal poverty data. So we have historically used this to fund one of our TOSA positions that helps support instruction across the district, and again providing additional professional learning opportunities for all teachers and administrators throughout the district. In addition to that, also some books if we're doing book studies or there's things we want to do in that regard, additional materials that we need for our professional development office, or within buildings we use these funds to do that. A little bit difficult to spend some of this money in the current environment. Last year, come March, we had a number of conferences. We've been very fortunate here in Penfield that we can send staff and administrators to top conferences around the country with the best experts out there. And we weren't able to do that in the spring, and we're not able to do that now. So I'll talk a little bit about carryover and what happens to unused funds in a little bit. Title III, as I mentioned, are the funds for our immigrant students and our English language learners. These funds, again, by population, so the number of L's or M's that you might have in your district historically, as well as your poverty data. And this, I'm looking at the wrong slide again on my computer. We use these funds district-wide, so again, providing additional professional learning opportunities for all teachers who may be supporting our L's or M's, as well as administrators, additional materials and supplies. We've purchased iPads in the past for use in our L's teachers' classrooms so that they can work on some translation things and have those resources available for students. And we've also typically funded our annual multicultural fair to showcase our many diverse cultures here in our district with those funds. An interesting caveat with Title III is you have to get a minimum allocation of $10,000 in order to receive any of the money at all. So if your federal allocation is $9,500, you get nothing for that year. So we're there. We have gotten an allocation, and I can kind of go over each one here in a minute, but of about $12,000 for each, the L side and the M side for this grant. Again, we have to track everything. We have to inventory tag everything. Any kind of hard items that can be, any tangible items have to be inventoried, and they can audit that and make sure we're using it in the right way. Title IV is again funded by funding determined by population and federal poverty. This again supports really SEL type work, a supportive learning environment, as well as enrichment opportunities. You do have an additional option with this to move it over and use it to support your Title II plans. And so because much of our professional learning is so focused on SEL, it makes perfect sense for us to do that. So we use that money to further support all of basically our professional learning plan as a whole, which is so focused on SEL and equity and things of that nature. Just quickly, Title IV, we've typically gotten around $22,000, $23,000 annually for that, and that's only just come back into play in the last 2 to 3 years, and we hadn't been receiving any Title IV funds for a while. I think it just was a program that wasn't funded. Title II, we're typically around $80,000, $85,000 a year. Title I, for most of my time here, we had been around $320,000, $330,000 a year. Last year, we had a little dip of about 40%, where this year our allocation was only $180,000, almost $190,000. That was because our federal poverty rate in the district dropped 0.99%. Less than 1% it dropped, and that Title I grant is actually made up of 4 parts. 2 of those parts, in order to qualify, your overall rate has to be above 5%. We dropped to 4 2/3% and lost about $140,000 of that grant this year. So that was slightly unexpected, and we'll see how that trends. I think there's a bit of a gap between that poverty data and potentially minimum wage, and so I'm not sure why that's shifting and trending the way it is as we see our free and reduced price lunch numbers continue to rise, but then dipping down in that regard. So that's quickly what each grant is and how it's used. If we then talk about supplement, not supplant, so that's some key language with the use of title grant funds. So essentially, you have to use the funds to add on to what you're already doing as a district and what you've already budgeted for. You can't take the money and say, well, we've already had this position in our budget. We're not cutting the funds from the budget, but now we want to use those funds from our general fund for something else, so we're going to use grant money to pay for it. It has to be in addition to what you're already doing, and that's how I talk about, for example, the literacy specialist positions at Cobbles and Indian Landing. We have additional positions that are solely funded by the grant, one in each building, that are supplementing our program, not supplanting positions that we already had. So that can be a little bit tricky. There are lists available on the state website and things of that nature that really outline what are allowable expenses in that regard and what does that mean. And Dr. Putnam has to submit every year. We have something we need to do probably tomorrow, that we have a strategy and we have a methodology for ensuring that we're supplementing and not supplanting. Different of the 4 titles, they have different limits in terms of carryover, what can happen if funds aren't spent. In a typical year, we can only carry over from year to year about 15% of Title I. You have to spend 85% of your allocation, which again, given some of the restrictions, can be sometimes difficult, and that's why we try to use it for staff, because then we know we can use those funds. There aren't or haven't been any limits on carryover for Title II, III, or IV. And then with the COVID pandemic last year, they took that away and are rolling everything over. So we have a good amount of funding that will be available once all the carryovers happen. Those things seem to be a little bit delayed, though. The initial grant application for this year hadn't yet been approved. And then usually it's approved by October. And then carryovers from the prior years become available in January, and we have to write amendments to include in our plans how we're going to use that funding. I don't know how timely that's going to be. We'll see what happens with that. And then Title III, again, I already mentioned the minimum allocation of $10,000 in that regard. So I think the big question then is how does this all impact, and why are we involved in the public schools? And this stems from a contract that will likely be coming before the board regarding the use of a vendor in the community to provide some tutoring support for students at our non-public schools. Essentially, these grants, they're federal grants. The money is given to the state. The federal government tells the state, you need to give this money to the districts, and you need to make sure they follow the rules on how to spend it. The state then gives us the money, and because the students live within our communities, and they would be going to our schools if they didn't go to non-public, or if they didn't go to non-public schools, those funds are directed for those students. And so we have to then share the funds with the non-public schools, and the state says to us, you need to make sure that the non-public schools within your district spend this money the right way. So we have to administer the grant for any non-public schools within our borders that choose to accept the funds. They can deny them. We actually do have one non-public school within our border that wants no part of it, doesn't want to play the game, doesn't want to have to listen to the rules, so they just don't even communicate with us about it in most cases. So we do have a number, actually we're up there, and we have a number of non-public schools that do have students who qualify to take advantage of some of these funds. And so we have to make sure that they spend the money in the right way. We have to have annual meetings with them and talk about what their balances are, what their allocations are going to be, kind of go over the rules with them, and then they have to submit plans to me regarding all 4 of these grants if they have students who qualify, that I then have to approve and say, yep, that's okay. And then for each activity they want to do, such as a contract for tutoring services, I have to approve it. But when those contracts, for example, this one in particular is usually upwards of $50,000, that's not something that Tom himself can approve. That has to come to you for approval, and so that's how you become aware. So to access Title I funds, and then there's 2 pieces to this. So there's students who are residents of Penfield, and in order to access or have the ability to use Title I funds, they have to be within grades K through 5, and their family has to reside within the Indian Landing or the Cobbles catchment area. So they would then get that per pupil allocation at that non-public school that they attend, right? So that impacts the non-pubs within our district, as well as we have students who attend non-public schools outside of our district. And whatever district that non-public in has to administer the grant for those kids. So it's very muddy waters in terms of managing all this. There's a lot of moving and shaking and parts moving around where the money goes. But the flip side of that is within our non-publics within our district, we have many students who are not residents of Penfield Central School District. They're residents of the city of Rochester, they're residents of Webster, they're residents of Greece or Fairport or wherever their families might live. And so even though they don't live within our district, I have to make sure that the non-public is spending the money appropriately on those kids. And so if you have a school, say like Mercy, who wants to use a vendor for tutoring services, many of the kids that are going to receive tutoring aren't our residents. But because we're the district of residents for the main portion of their district, we have to pay that initial bill and have that contract. And then we bill back through the business office to all the districts where those kids come from who qualify based on their school of residence, the amount to fulfill that. So the money moves many different times between the federal government, the state government, the local district, and then the district of location of services. So it's a lot. So that really comes down to why they're able to do that. Title II, similar, that's more of a per pupil allocation. So if you've got 10 kids from your district who are at that non-pub, they get that 10 kids per pupil allocation. If it's $1,000 a child, they get that money and they can spend it on the same things that we would allow. So that's the lens that I typically have to use when I approve their activities is, would we do this potentially in Penfield? Does this seem to meet all of the regulations? Title III, obviously, the students would have to be either L's or immigrants, English language learners or immigrants, to generate funding for those schools. Title IV, however we use our Title IV, the non-publics have to use their Title IV. So we roll it into Title II, they can apply it to their Title II plans as well. But again, we're helping manage that for these districts, and they have funds coming in from other districts as well because they have students who come from all these other districts. So it is a very interesting process. It's one that I knew really not hardly anything about until I came to Penfield, and this was under that list of things of duties as otherwise assigned somewhere along the line. I don't know if it was Dr. Sansucci way back in the day said, I don't want to deal with it, let the ASI deal with it. I don't know how Dr. Driffill yet feels about the ASI dealing with it. Maybe he dealt with it in his prior district. But that is a very, very quick overview of what the title grants are, the federal title grants are, what they're supposed to be used for, how we're using them here in Penfield, and why we're in the business of dealing with them with the non-public schools. I think most of us, whether it's business officials or ASIs, would agree, just give them a check and let them do what they want with it and let the state oversee it, but that's not how it works. So with that very quick summary, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them and clarify.
Okay, thank you, board. Anything that needs to be clarified on that, or is it pretty straightforward? Any questions? Comments?
Like 20 questions, but
Go for it.
I got to think about it. Then I'll let you know.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm like
bring you back.
confused or yeah.
So I have one question.
Yeah, please.
You're talking about, as you talk about this, is the title funding, I mean, is it forward-looking in the sense that what we're looking on is the title funding we're going to get for the next budget year? Do you find out that the money you get is for this year, or do you find out the money you're going to get is for next year? In other words, how does it align with our budgeting year?
It's a little off. So we usually start to get an idea of our initial allocations for the upcoming school year in about March. And then we can actually spend the current year's funds after the school district budget year. So we can spend grant funds up till August 31st. So the timing's a little bit off, but they give us an initial allocation. And then through the summer, we have to submit the grant application for all 4 of those by August 31st. And then, like I said, typically in October, we find out how much of it, whether or not it's been approved, we need to make changes if there's been adjustments. And then again in January, we find out what our total carryover, if it's going to be what it's expected, or if they're reducing that in any way.
So these are unknowns at the time of the budget, but you have some general assumptions.
Yeah. They've been, other than the change to Title I, it's been pretty stable, within a few $1,000s on each of the grants since in my 8 years here. So
Okay.
that Title I one was, we didn't see that coming because we don't have access to that data typically. I had to dig to find out where that change was and send an email up the chain to the state to ask some clarifying questions about why we had seen such a big reduction. But once they told me, it made sense.
Again, anyone else? All right. Again, thank you again.
No problem.
So that concludes superintendent reports. Just a reminder that Jim's presentation, you must remember in full when we bring you a contract to approve for a private school using title grant funds.
I'm saving my questions.
All right, perfect. Thank you to Jim and Dan.
I've heard it about 3 times.
So, is anything further?
Oh, no, that concludes
Oh, thank
superintendent
you,
reports.
thank
No,
you.
I got to say it twice. That's my favorite
Oh, I
part.
missed it then, sorry about
No
that.
problem.
Okay, that brings us to, make sure I've got this right, Section 8, Policies for First Read. We have 4 policies for first read. They are 5670, Records Management, 6150, Alcohol, Drugs, and Other Substances for School Personnel, and there's 6150R1, which is actually, it's a regulation, not a policy, which is related to this previous one, regulation, alcohol, drugs, and other substances for school personnel. And then 6170, fingerprinting of prospective school employees. Does someone on the policy committee wish to speak to these?
This is where they usually look at me.
You.
I'd be happy to talk
Oh,
about
okay.
these. And I thank Sharon Erkfitz, who prints us up as policy a little read. So, but just, yeah, as you mentioned, records management, policy 5670. The state is revising and consolidating its records retention and disposition schedules and issuing a single comprehensive retention schedule for all types of government. So for a long time, we've just been using what's called the ED1, a schedule used just by school districts, BOCES, county vocational education programs, teacher resource, computer training centers, but mainly schools. And so we've used the ED1 schedule for all of our records retention and disposition schedules. And now the state has decided they're not going to do that. They're going to consolidate all of them into one. That includes the schedule used by counties, which is the CO2, the MU1, which is used by cities, towns, and villages and fire districts, and the MI1, which is used by other local governments. And so they're going to combine those all into one called the LGS1. And the LGS1 will go from a document of ED1, which is, can't remember, 90 pages, something like that? 180 pages, and now it's going to be bigger. So it's going to be larger, but we don't have any control over that. That's a change. We actually have to also adopt, the board has to adopt a resolution adopting that it will start using the LGS1. It doesn't change any of our record retention. It doesn't change any of the processes yet. It just changes where we go to get the information on what we have to follow. And so there will be a resolution at the December 8th board meeting, but the only change we have to make the policy is currently in 5670, it references the ED1. We need to make it reference the LGS1, and it'll be perfect because if we can do that, then the December 8th meeting, it'll be second read approval and the resolution that the board would pass. The 6150 this is part of our 5-year policy review, and that is the alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and other substances policy it's really for staff. It's in the 6000 series. It does add tobacco and changes school personnel to staff in the policy title. It does clearly prohibit the use of tobacco, prohibits the use the misuse and of unprescribed use of prescription and over-the-counter drugs. So that's an add to the policy, is the misuse and unprescribed use of prescription medication. And it also prohibits smoking and adding vaping on school grounds or at any school-sponsored event, even if we were not on school grounds, like we talk about dances and proms and all those good old things we did before COVID. It does have some updates in there around disciplinary measures and the information on substance use related services. We have to name who we use. We use Delphi Rise counselors as provided. And then there is a regulation that goes along with it, which again just references Delphi Rise counselors. Our Delphi Rise counselors are really there for students, but staff, they're also available for staff for conversation. But if a staff member really needs support in any area around drugs, alcohol, tobacco, we do have a employee assistance program that we list as well, and that employee assistance program is completely confidential. Any staff member in Penfield can call and get support through that process, and that is overseen in the HR department, but again, it's completely confidential for our staff. We can only determine, they only share with us how many calls they took, but never who it was or what they said or anything like that. So we share that information with staff on a regular basis. And then the other change is fingerprinting. It's the fingerprinting clearance as policy 6170. It used to have a different title, which was fingerprinting of prospective school employees. And we updated this very lengthy existing policy, and it's a much shorter policy now. It eliminated the fingerprinting language for conditional appointments and emergency conditional appointments, along with the sunset provision allowing these types of appointments. So it really aligns with law. It's been reviewed by HR, and it's in there for first read.
Okay. Board, any comments or questions on that?
Doesn't policy committee sound exciting when I talk about
It
all the
does.
things we discussed?
I had
We had a good group.
Change the time
Yeah.
of that, then we'd always change. And then, and just as a reminder to the general public, this is the first read, then the next meeting will be the second read, in which case the public will have an opportunity to have had an opportunity to review this, and we will then vote on it. And then, so now we have, I'll make sure I'm in the right spot. Committee meetings. So we've had one committee meeting, which was a legislative committee, and that was the Monroe County School Board Association Legislative Committee. And Catherine is not here, but I did attend it as well. And this one, I'm going to get my note out. This was a special one because we had special guests. The interim chancellor, T. Andrew Brown, and Regent Norwood, Wade Norwood, were both there as kind of like a mini panel to answer our questions. It was really a very unique opportunity to have them both there for the legislative committee. And I know there's been meetings between the Monroe County School Board Association and representatives with them, but this was again a nice opportunity. They were very candid, and we had a lot of good conversation. And I'm just trying to summarize a few points here in that, they all acknowledge what I think we all understand is that the children, they're speaking statewide in general, not specifically Penfield or Monroe County, but in general, the children are in many ways, they're suffering from all these crises that are going on. Some areas are impacted more than others. Some districts are better able to help accommodate the students than others. But in general, this is hurting. It hurts everybody, but it's also hurting our students. And basically, how does this public education system survive all these crises? And the kinds of things he pointed out is we need to take advantage of this crisis to really re-examine the way we do things and challenge some of the norms, throw some things away and try new things. I think one of the things is he talked about technology, and I think this, there's some things like you brought up today with the Infinite Campus.
Mm-hmm.
We had an assumption and it challenged our assumption. Now but that assumption shows that maybe that was underutilized, and so that's giving us a new look at that and how we can utilize it more. So those are the kinds of things that need to be done, especially with technology. They also talked about the fact that, I think they all recognize that one way or another fiscal pain is going to come. And we've talked about that with the budget. One thing that they're trying to do is talk about how can they help us, and the Board of Regents help us, and they talk about being willing to listen to the ideas and to improve the workforce and the workforce availability. And we've talked about shortage of teachers, shortage of staff, and they're willing to listen to ideas on how we can do that, which, in a lot of ways, I think one thing that always comes up is how can we get more people into education, how can we have more diversity in education, how can we have more people from out of state eligible to be hired within the state, and they're willing to look at that. And then they're trying to allow the teachers and the districts the flexibility in how they teach. They don't want to be, they're trying to be less prescriptive, and I would look to you guys to talk about how prescriptive they are, because you're the ones who have to deal with it. But they want to be less prescriptive and again, provide the outcomes, the goals, the achievables, and let you work on more how that can be achieved. Now that's what they presented us. I don't doubt their sincerity, but we'll just see how, I think we look at that as the opportunity, and we'll see how much of that opportunity we're able to realize. And there was more. This gives you a sense of the kind of candor we got from them, and it was definitely worthwhile. Any questions or comments on that? School tours. Then we had a school tour. We finished our school tour on Monday the 9th, which was Scribner and Bay Trail. We visit all our facilities every year, including the non-student facilities like the buildings and grounds and bus garage. But this last tour was for Scribner and Bay Trail. Scribner has a lot of construction going on. We got to see that and see the progress of that, and it's very impressive. And again, Alan McNiff did a great job doing the tour. He's just so knowledgeable on everything, with not just the projects, but the infrastructure, the history of the infrastructure, why things are the way they are, or why decisions were made. It's always very educational, and this is always in light of what the academic needs of the students are, because these things are built to meet the needs of our students, to meet the needs of our academic programs. And board, does anyone have anything they'd like to say about the tours? Barb?
I thought I totally agree with what you said, and it was just fascinating to see how far the capital project additions are coming. I mean, amazing. So if there's a positive about the COVID, it's that they were still able to continue and are doing wonderful things to get it all done.
Mm-hmm. And if I recall, it's been very smooth. There's been no real issues. Yes. We'll see what the changing rooms come
We're
out.
knocking on wood. Absolutely. They're doing great.
Good.
Oh, and it was good to see students in the building when we were on the tours.
So there is no unfinished business. Is there any new business? All right. With that, I'll get to this. Our next meeting is November 19th. That's a policy committee meeting. And then December 8th is our next board meeting. That's the last board meeting for the calendar year. So with that, I'd like to have a motion and a second that the meeting be adjourned at 9:27.
So moved.
Second.
Because everyone wants
We'll
to
stay until someone
right?
seconds, yes.
Right.
Any question or discussion? All those in favor? Meeting adjourned.